Now, the fact that a president of Stanford presides over a lecture by a Berkeley, we refer to that as Cal, a Cal professor, former dean of the Haas School of Business, no less. The fact that I am introducing her will surprise only those who believe that Cal-Stanford football rivalry penetrates all aspects of our institutional relations. The football event, what is known as Big Game, is coming up on November 23rd, this Saturday. This year it will be at Stanford, and you all still have a chance to go if Lufthansa flies. That we don't know, but if Lufthansa is flying, you may manage to go there, and I encourage you, it's on a Saturday, easily for you to go and return in time. You should know that the first big game was played in 1892 between Stanford and Berkeley and Cal. And I became president of Stanford in 1992, and one of the first things I had to attend was the 100th anniversary of the big game. I have no interest in football whatsoever, you have to understand. Oh, thank God, I didn't dare ask you, Laura. So we are both in that same way. We are both thinking the same way. Now, I was very reluctant to say all of this because where's Professor Zeisman? Where is he hiding? Oh, there. He was sitting next to me at dinner, and he always referred to Stanford as Leland Stanford Junior University, emphasizing the junior university. And I was not amused by that, but I have heard that kind of abuse for a long time. Now, I do not know whether Mr. Silberman, who will, actually, all I'm doing is I'm going to introduce a person who will introduce Laura, but, and that person will be Mr. Silberman, who attended, of course, Oxford. But I don't know, did you ever attend a Cambridge-Oxford both ways?
Of course.
Of course, he says.
I was going to recommend it to people. It's closer.
Yeah. Right, it is closer. So, but it is in April, November 23rd. That's very close. The boat race is normally in April or something like that, right? Now, and we now learn that he did attend, there are 250,000 onlookers at the boat race, roughly on the average. And the big game attracts only about 50,000, but that's only a function of the fact that our stadiums are not larger than that. Wolfgang Silbermann will introduce the Holbrook lecturer. Mr. Silbermann heads the Speech and Communications Office of the German President, Frank Steinmeier. Actually, your president, of course, spoke here earlier this year, and you are succeeding him. Mr. Silbermann, it is impossible for me to say Silbermann. I mean, Silberman, I'm so used to the other versions of your name. But here we go. I'll try again. Mr. Silbermann has worked with Mr. Steinmeier for many years, both in the Bundestag and the Foreign Office, before his present appointment. He holds a BA in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford. I just made reference to that. And a master in public policy from a Massachusetts university that is located in a suburb of Boston. I'm referring to Harvard for those who didn't get it.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kasper. Maybe just to take some of the edge off, I can also recommend the Harvard-Yale game. It's in terms of the boat race, it's true we went earlier, but then Kate and I, earlier this year, we acquired, for home use, we acquired a rowing machine. And ever since, I've really understood what these guys are really doing. You know, It's amazing. Thank you, Professor Kasper. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to introduce to you this year's Richard Holbrooke Fellow of the Academy, Professor Laura Tyson. Laura is one of the most influential economists in the US, with a distinguished career spanning academia, academic leadership, and public policy. She has been on the faculty first at Princeton and then for many years and in many different roles at UC Berkeley, or Cal, as you called it, where she is now distinguished professor of the graduate school at Haas. Under President Clinton, Laura served as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, as well as chair of the National Economic Council, the difference between which I only understand after our last meeting. Laura was Dean of the Haas Business School and Dean of the London Business School. Frankly, the list goes on, and I find it actually too impressive and somewhat intimidating to continue, so maybe I can add a personal perspective. As a trained social scientist and economist, as you said, now working as a Ministerialbeamter in the German public sector, which basically means I'm surrounded by lots of lawyers, how we call them, Volljuristen here. Laura's career, for me, really embodies this intersection of academic economics, academic excellence, and deep public service. And that's a kind of an ideal of a career I've always looked up to, and that a model I think our more rigid, more siloed German system could really benefit from. Laura, I know we cannot keep you in Germany permanently, but your current research focuses on Germany, and you're also, I heard, working with German colleagues on it. And so we're here to benefit from that research. The topic of your Holbrooke lecture is Jobs Gained, Jobs Lost, the Labor Market Transformed, Automation's Effects on Employment and Livelihoods in Germany. I remember that you discussed these issues last year with my boss, President Steinmeier, at the World Economic Forum in San Francisco. That was last year, and when I look at the German side of the debate since, these questions have gained much more attention here, but they've also become more polarizing. Is automation a good thing or a bad thing for workers? Will intelligent tools destroy jobs or create jobs? Is this future of work, this work 4.0, is this really a dystopia or a utopia? So the urgency of the questions here has grown, but so has, I find, the desire to be black or white in the answers. And that brings me lastly to the last dinner we shared here, Laura, at the Academy, when I asked Laura a little bit what it's like advising the US president. And Laura said, look, when a president, a politician, comes to you and wants definite, absolutist answers, you know, he has to talk to one of the other guys. What you can get from an economist is a better and a more honest sense of the trade-offs. And the job of politics is to weigh and to balance and to communicate trade-offs rather than pretend easy answers. So, Laura, we are ready for some of the more balanced, more complex answers tonight. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I want to start with thanks to the Academy. We who are lucky enough to be fellows here realize just how lucky we are almost instantly when we arrive. I had heard about what it was like to be at the Academy from some previous fellows. I had high expectations. The expectations have been more than realized. So anybody who has an opportunity here to ever be a fellow here should definitely take advantage of it. And I just want to start that way because there's thanks that could go to so many individuals who both run the Academy. I see a number of them in this room, a number of them you saw at dinner, you'll see them outside, and also to the donors who very generously make the Academy possible. So just a word of thanks. I want to start with just an observation. It's not a surprise. I was talking at dinner about the technological revolution that is ongoing. We are involved in the midst of a technological revolution. It's changing everything. It's changing how we earn, that is our work. It's changing how we learn, our education system. It's changing how we live. We're all carrying our phones around. We're all walking into walls while we're doing things, walking. Yeah, it's changing everything. My research is focused on the effects on work. I could study the effects on learning. I could study the effects on privacy. I could study the effects on the formation of sociological networks. I'm focused on work. And being a diehard policy maker, a diehard public servant, I am interested in thinking about the policy implications. We have a set of policies and institutions in the advanced industrial countries, Germany being one of those, the US being another, that were built up in a different technological era. Some of them really strong institutions in Germany really have their roots in guilds. So they have their roots in not the last 20th century, but the century before that. So basically, we have to, if we're interested in policy as I am, try to think about, well, what do we need? What changes do we need? Now, changes for what? What's the goal here? So I talk about livelihoods. Let me just say that the goal here is, for most citizens of every society, a main thing of their life is their work. It's their work. It's their work because their income is dependent upon their work. It's their work because their status is dependent upon their work. It's their work because their role in the community depends upon their work. So basically, we have to think about the work we provide to citizens as we go through this technological revolution. So in a sense, my policy question is how to support good jobs, good work. And I sometimes use the term livelihoods there, but I sometimes also use the term good work. I've become convinced, if you think about it, the technological revolution we're living through is not new. It's a continuation of a whole process. We're celebrating 50 years of the internet. If you look at the use of robots in German factories, that's been around for quite some time now. So we have had automation or technological change. And it's interesting to note that different societies they've had some of the similar effects, but they've also moderated them. So this goes to the trade-off point. So let's say some of the similar pressures. I'm going to start out with the pressures because I'm going to talk about them throughout my talk. The technology tends to be what economists call job polarizing. It is hitting the middle skills and the middle wages the most. So that's where you see the declines, a share of employment decline of middle wage, an increase in the share of employment in the top, and an increase or decrease or kind of stabilization at the bottom. So the main thing that we know is the middle reduced as a share, the top increased as a share when I'm talking about skills and wages. So that's something that all of our societies share, but they share them to different extents, and they do different things about them. Another thing that's related to that, obviously, is widening wage inequality, because if you're going to have the middle jobs disappearing and the high-end jobs increasing, the wage distribution is going to pull apart, so widening wage inequality, another one. You have the situation of productivity growth. So this is a favorite economist term, and I know not everybody here is an economist. So basically, productivity is a concept of the output per worker. And the rate of growth of productivity in economic theory is supposed to drive the rate of growth of labor compensation or wages. But in this new technological era, that hasn't always been true. We've seen a kind of gap grow between the productivity of the workforce and the compensation of the workforce. So again, it's a common problem or a common effect. You can call it a problem, I call it a problem, but you can call it just a common effect that our advanced industrial societies are experiencing. But different societies do different things to try to address the problems, change the policies, change the workers having an ability to voice their concerns. They have different responses. And what I was really interested in was thinking about what to learn from Germany. with the hypothesis that there's no technological determinism here. Technology is generating some common effects, but institutions and policies can mediate or moderate. And although I doubt that my messaging about what we learned from Germany will be very much heard at the federal government in the United States right now, the federal government is kind of, it's got a do not disturb, do not expect action sign outside. Okay, so, but states can do things. And California, just as a way of thinking about this, even though we have the Stanford-Berkeley rivalry, we both are at the home in California of an economy in California that is regularly estimated to be the 5th or 6th largest in the world. And as a share of the U.S. economy, it's about the same as the Germany share of the European economy. It's kind of an interesting analogy there. So maybe I take some messaging back, and my California governor hears it. I have a good link to the California governor, so I'll get the message to him. Okay, so with that in mind, I think it's useful to start with a picture of a robot, because now the thing I want to point out about this robot is my picture with the robot next to it. Okay, because I just happened to be in Dubai this past weekend for the World Economic Forum, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, has taken a whole what used to be a very, very high-end and empty shopping mall, and it's created a massive accelerator where teams from around the world are invited to develop innovative solutions to challenges that the UAE develops. Says, here's a challenge, come and work on the challenge. And I happened to be in the accelerator, so I decided I would take a picture for you all with the robot. And there, as part of the accelerator of Humans 2.0, there's a little escalator if you're a human and you need to go up the stairs. So, and by the way, there's also there something, there's a UAE office building, office, and it says the Ministry of Possibilities. It's the Ministry of Possibilities, okay? And I said to one of my, to another guest tonight, there's also an office there which, if you are an innovator, you get some accelerator support, you want to start a company in Dubai or the UAE, there's one room with all of the places you have to get a signature from. You do not have to leave the premises. So a little lesson for Germany, I think, and for the US too. I'm not going to. Okay, so let me go to this. I want to start by, so my colleagues here, and it's wonderful, the fellows thing is so great because you have wonderful colleagues. A lot of them talk about capitalism. So I'm not talking about capitalism. I'm talking about the global economy and work. And there are a lot of things that are driving it. I just want to put these up there so you, because sometimes when I'm talking about technology, I say, okay, if we're talking about the future of work in the next 30 years, if we don't talk about climate change, somehow we're missing something, because the future of work and the future of climate change seem to be related. Globalization, you hear a lot about offshoring and global competition and supply chains and all that. That's all technology enabled. So I actually tend to put technology together with globalization and just call it technology enabled globalization. It's like you redesign the factory system around the world because the technology allows you to do it. So gender roles, because I worked a lot with the UN on their new sustainable development goals, and around the world, I can assure you, a major change over the next 25 to 30 years is going to be the increasing role of women in the economy. So if you're thinking about things that drive everything, the use of technology, women are going to be involved. And then finally, because this is a big theme I think we all have to think about, economists love, when they love competition, when they love markets and capitalism, what they love about it is competition. So the argument, the Adam Smith argument, is the reason it's so great is because we get all this competition. And the competition breeds efficiency. And the competition breeds productivity. And we have going on around the world right now, particularly in the advanced industrial countries, a consolidation of market power. It's actually anti-competitive. So I just want to put that up there. When you're thinking about all this stuff, think about that. Okay, so the paradox of the present. I'm going to talk about people's worries about the application of technology, okay? But we better be careful here. Right now, things are going pretty well. And they're going really quite well in Germany. They're going really very well. So I want to point out the paradox of the present, because people are really worried about, will robots take my job? Will algorithms take my job? What is going to happen to my job? And in the meantime, we got really tight labor markets. We got low unemployment rates. We got high employment to population rates. We got a lot of indicators of strong economies. The US true, Germany certainly true. Yet people are pessimistic. They're pessimistic. So they think, oh my goodness, the robots may take over my job. The algorithm may take over my job. And what I want to say is that students of technological change suggest that there's a reason to be worried. There's a reason to be worried. Okay? While society may be better off 2 or 3 generations from now if we make robots do more nasty work for us, but the people who lose their job in the process, they lose their work. And remember, my definition of meaning here is that work is income, it's status, it's presence in the community. So if you take jobs away and you don't provide alternatives, then that's a reason to be worried. So I say the Luddites are right, because basically the concern of one group of craft guild workers that technology was going to take away their job, they were correct. That's exactly what it did. That's exactly what it did. And sometimes it takes a pretty long time for the new jobs to come through at the level of wages and status and livelihoods that the old jobs have. So the old jobs disappear, the new jobs don't appear at the same pace, and they're not as good, at least initially. So there's a reason to be worried. This is just a bunch of stuff showing various concerns. This actually comes from Hal Varian. So Hal Varian is the chief economist at Google. He's a good friend of mine. He's an optimist. He's a complete optimist. He thinks that basically this is all going to work out fine. But he kind of uses these kind of places of journalism to say this is what people are worried about. And then he goes on to say there's no reason to be worried. So lessons from past waves of automation. I don't want to go on too much about this, but let me just say we know something. I've already said some things we know, but first of all, we know that economic growth, GDP per capita, some measures of prosperity, that a major determinant of that is technological progress. We know that over the course of humanity, technological progress has been beneficial for economic growth. Okay, so we know that. And we also know there's no evidence of long-term technological unemployment. So somehow the technology changes the way work is done, the way production is organized. There's a lot of transition, a lot of disruption. A lot of people may lose their jobs along the way. A lot of people may actually end up in worse jobs. But if you're thinking about a whole bunch of people are going to be without work, I wouldn't think about that. I wouldn't think about that. I don't think that is in the foreseeable future. I don't think so. Now, I do know some technologists who have said to me, one of them said, well, by 50 years from now, we should be thinking about artificial intelligence as like an invasion of people from outer space. We should actually have a plan for how we're going to deal with this, because it is going to fundamentally change work and take away work. I'm thinking about 15 years from now. Okay, I don't know about 50 years from now, and I'm not a science fiction person, and I'm not a technologist, so I'm doing 15 years, okay? And I don't think we're going to see a lot of technological unemployment. But we can see a lot of disruption. So, by the way, technologists tend to use disruption as a positive word. Oh, disruption, it's innovation, it's disruption. Well, okay, disruption for most people is a horrible word. It's horrible. Do you want to have your work disrupted, your family disrupted, the place you work disrupted? Do you really want that? No, most people don't. And it causes much insecurity. And insecurity is a major part, a major function or contributor, I guess, to populist revolts. So be careful here, wishing the disruption you wish for. So in any event, there's going to be a lot of disruption, and the costs associated with disruption fall unevenly on sectors. Some sectors get hurt more than others, on place. So we see now going on, certainly in the US and I believe in Germany, a divergence in the economic opportunities associated with place, with location. And part of that has to do with this disruption. Which sectors are going to decline, which are going to grow. The benefits of technological change often take decades, and I already said that, and the eventual beneficiaries are not necessarily those who bear the costs. So this is not a fair process, and it can be a socially destabilizing process. I wanted to put this up. Stephen's not here, but so just the national fellows, our fellows, last 2 nights ago, we had our political science fellow talking about capitalism, and he used, this is interesting, this is an automation factory vision from a century ago. So you can use my robot, or you can use this. Technological change has been with us. Okay. There's something distinctive about the kind of technological change we're going through now. Okay? And this is very important. It's what economists call skill biased. Okay? It increases the demand for certain kinds of skills, particularly high-end skills, technical skills, skills that are complemented or have to work with the technology to make it work, and middle skills, which can be where the technology can substitute. And that is very important because it goes to that polarization or widening I talked about earlier. And so we see that in the polarization. I already mentioned what polarization is. And I already mentioned that polarization has contributed to increasing wage and income inequality. Now, I want to say right away that it's not the only thing. We've had increasing income and wage inequality in the US and in Germany. We've had both, and in many of the developed economies. There are many factors contributing to this, many factors. I think technological change is one. But it's not the only one. And therefore, it's hard to measure the exact importance of technological change to this. The kind of best way to do it is to look at that skill distribution and say, okay, I know the technology is taking out middle skill. I know it's adding higher skills. I can look at the income wage effects in those skill levels. But I just want to point out there are lots and lots of factors contributing to increasing wage and income inequality. And people who work on that topic, particularly income inequality, there's a whole bunch of debate among economists about what are the most important factors. So I just want to note that. This is a little picture showing, just showing polarization. This is 15 European economies. It's employment measured in millions. You can see very clearly the middle-skilled employment is going down. The high-skilled employment is going up. The good news is it's going up faster than the middle's going down. And the low skill is also going up. So that's a nice little picture of polarization. Here's a messier picture of polarization. I want to say for anybody who decides they're deeply interested in this topic, the OECD is really a fabulous source of collection of data, and some of which is being supported by your own Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. It's really good research on a variety of things. And so here's a picture. You can see Germany up here. You can see that the bar down is the middle. In this case, it's a percentage change in the share of working adults in a middle skill that's going down. The one in the higher skill is going up. The one in low skill is going up a little bit. That's basically, again, just a picture of polarization. This is basically my point that, look, there are lots of things that can affect the consequences of the same technology. So the things that I've thought about here, and I'll continue to think about, are things like education, labor market regulations, collective bargaining regimes, financial markets, public investments, tax and transfer. There are lots of things, okay? The key thing is that if you look at the advanced industrial economies, actually subject to this same technological change over the last, say, 30 years, same skill bias, same stuff. They have same degree of polarization, comparable productivity growth, but they actually do differ in how the benefits are shared. So if you look at things like the share of capital in national income versus a share of labor in national income, it looks different across these societies. If you look at the degree of wage inequality among workers subject to the same technology, that degree of wage inequality looks different. So I think, well, let's think about it. What are the policies and institutions that matter to make these differences? Okay, I'm going to very quickly go through this because I'll run out of time, I know already. I got involved with this first with McKinsey Global Institute. They did a very good study a few years ago using generally available data and also all of their data which comes from their companies, all the companies around the world they deal with. Okay, so they had their own database and all of the globally available databases, and they said, well, let's try to figure out exactly what percentage of jobs right now, just with technically available technologies. So they're currently available, they currently could be put to use. What does that mean for tasks? And what I would say, what I find interesting here is about 60% of the occupations around the world have at least 30% of the activities that can be automated right now. So you have to think, oh, well, you're designing a job. What does that mean? Should you actually have people work 30% less? Should you actually lay off, concentrate these tasks in certain activities and then sort of have a smaller workforce? What should you do? So I think that's a big number. 60% have at least 30% of activities and tasks automatable. I think that's a big number. That's right now. It's right now. Which are the ones that are most susceptible to automation? Unfortunately, there's stuff that most people do. Okay, most people do stuff that the machine can do some of what you do now. Okay, they're routine physical tasks, manufacturing being prime, and routine cognitive tasks, things like collecting data and processing data. Okay, these are big employers. These are big employment shares of these economies. So, for example, in the U.S., the most susceptible activities, that is, the ones most susceptible to automation right now, account for almost half of all working hours in the United States right now. So if the technology were to spread rapidly, half of those working hours would disappear. Okay. For the U.S. and Germany, what McKinsey sort of says is, let's assume the pace is kind of midpoint. And they do this based on looking at the adoption of a whole bunch of technologies at a fast pace, at a slow pace, and at a mid pace. And they choose mid always, so their numbers are always mid. And they say, okay, in the next 15 years, about 23% of the work hours in the US and 24% of the work hours in Germany have the potential to be automated. Again, will they be automated? Depends. It depends on a number of things, but the technical potential is there. So that is an important observation. This is a very messy slide, so I only want to do a couple of takeaways from this slide. McKinsey has good slides in general. This one they tried to put too much on one slide, so it's kind of a mess. But a couple of things it says. So you see the 23 and 24 up there. I already mentioned that. Those are the potential to be automated. Where might future jobs come from? Okay, that's a really important question. If you're thinking about the technology may reduce some jobs or some tasks, but there may be demand for other jobs and other tasks in the future. Where is that going to come from? Okay, so it's a very interesting list they came up with. So they said, okay, demographics matter. Demography matters a lot. Demographics matter a lot. So things like healthcare, things like care for the elderly, things like care for children. Those are things where we don't think the technology is going to displace the tasks. It's going to do the tasks. The technology is going to do the tasks. Humans are going to do those tasks. So it's going to depend upon what happens to those to demand in those sectors. Look at a couple of other really interesting ones here. Investment in infrastructure, buildings, and energy. So I was talking to someone yesterday from McKinsey. So one of the big problems now developing in the U.S., and it's also true here, is housing. So when I say investment in buildings, a lot of times investment in housing, which is very important to people's life. It's very important to people's life. So you could have an increase in the demand for housing, but you have to figure out how to fund it. Who's going to fund that? Who's going to make that investment? What that set of things up there tells you is if there's investment in healthcare that's adequate, investment in infrastructure that's adequate, building buildings, investing in alternative energy, if there's investment in taking previously unpaid care work and making it paid care, we'll get jobs. There will be jobs for humans. Depends upon the demand. And then just the bottom here is just sort of saying, where do we think right now jobs are likely to disappear and where are they likely to appear. These are kinds of jobs. So they did for advanced and developing. I just want to focus tonight on advanced. I already said routine. Anything that's predictable and physical we can have, and unpredictable and physical, that's manufacturing. So the reason that Germany has a lot of jobs at risk in the middle right now is still got a pretty big manufacturing employment base where automation can really do a lot. Okay, so those are the kind of jobs that are likely to decline, and the ones that are likely to increase, I don't know, lawyers, doctors, academics, care providers, very important. I like creatives. I have no idea how we support creatives as a society, but okay, if there are going to be more creatives, we have to figure out a way to support them, is all I would say. I like it, but we need to support them. Okay, so what does this say? This is just giving examples of the kinds of things that are likely to grow and the kinds of things that are likely to disappear. So that's fine. I've already talked about a number of them. A key thing here is, key. The skills required for the jobs of the future are different from the skills required for the jobs of today. There are gaps. How do you figure out the skills for the jobs of the future, and then how do you provide pathways for people to get those skills? Because the gaps are significant, and we need to worry about pathways. And so Germany is worrying about that, by the way, in terms of their apprenticeships. But that's a very important area for policy. And here I'm going to sadly say, because I think it's true, that given polarization, given technology, remember the skill bias of technology, the occupations in the middle of the wage distribution, that's where almost everybody is, the 20th to 80th percentile. Probably most people in this room might be in that range, have the highest risk of being automated. Highest risk. That's not particularly good news. Okay. So here is the case of Germany. So first of all, I want to point out, lovely robot. One of the best robot manufacturers in the world is a German manufacturer, recently bought by the Chinese. Okay, I think that's interesting, important. Remember I talked about globalization before? This is a globalization factor. Anyway, Germany's at full employment, shortages of skilled labor, wages are rising. They're actually rising from the low wage to the high wage. Everybody's wage is rising. The wages at the top are rising more, but it's a very tight labor market right now. And so we're getting good present-day performance. The OECD has this wonderful dashboard they've developed now, and the dashboard is to kind of compare countries on the quality and the quantity of employment. And so I thought it was useful to actually point out that Germany looks pretty good here for those of you who are interested. This is this next slide. Without going through all of this, you can go through it at your leisure. Let me just say that there are only a few areas where Germany doesn't outperform, that is, do better than both the US and the OECD average. Okay, so Germany does better on things like the unemployment rate, the employment rate, measure of how many people are at work, utilization, on wages, on where do they do relatively poor? This is just interesting, I think. One is they have a higher risk of automation. And that is because they have a strong manufacturing base. That is why. Okay, that's why the risk of automation is higher. Okay, simple. They have a little more job strain. Well, I've heard that it's hard to work. People work hard here. They work hard. There's a little more job strain, but not much. There is a not really good performance on the share of workers that earn 2/3 of the median income or less. So the low income rate, okay? The low income rate is certainly lower than it is in the United States, where it's atrocious and awful. But actually, Germany is a little bit higher than the European, the OECD rate. And then I just want to point out that Germany has still got a pretty big gender wage gap, women, men wage gap. Yeah, you're making progress, but it's not. It's a little slow. That's all I'd say. Okay, so, but I want to show one other. This shows part-time work. So Germany stands out here. There's a whole bunch of growth in part-time employment in Germany, and that's connected to the fact that you guys, Germany has improved the labor force participation rate of women, but it's heavily in part-time work. Okay, and you can think about the organization of the school system, the fact that basically it's still very hard for a mother to have full-time work. It's not organized in such a way as to basically support that. So this is just an observation that I thought I would make, because if you're doing the quality or quantity, if you're comparing German labor market on dashboard, I think this is an important one. This just shows polarization, another set of numbers, and I want to get into some of the other stuff, so I will say that this is another picture of polarization. Okay, so here are some McKinsey observations for Germany. So I think this is, so I gave you some things on the present state of the German economy. I think it's useful to then talk a little bit about the future. And so the future is the McKinsey estimates for Germany. Basically, the first point is don't worry about technological unemployment at all here. You don't have to do very much. At trend investment rates in housing, at trend investment rates in infrastructure, at trend investment rates in alternative energy and care and all the rest of it, given that you have a declining workforce, you have a declining workforce anyway, there'll be enough demand to absorb workers. So we're not going to, it's not a problem even in the next 15 years to face technological unemployment. There's a lot of change in composition and skills, and there may be a deterioration in the wages of different groups, but not an employment problem. That's, by the way, not true in the U.S. In the U.S., right now the prediction is the U.S. government needs to do much more, otherwise we're going to end up with some, over a 15-year period, some technological unemployment. Not long-term, but 15 years. Third of the workforce, I already mentioned, may have to switch occupational groups. Employment and wage polarization likely to continue. So I think this is important to read this one. The share of employment in the bottom 2/3 of the wage distribution is likely to fall. That's good news. The share in the top 1/3 is likely to increase. Okay, good. That's good. You're getting more employment in the high skill area. The demand for workers with less than a secondary education, however, is likely to fall, while the demand for workers with a college or more advanced degree is likely to increase. So what this is telling you is, hey, the jobs can be there, okay? The upskilling can be there. We can see that in the projection about jobs, but we've got to worry about the skilling. We've got to do that in Germany. And then the last point is basically for the workers who cannot figure a skill way out, who are currently employed in these routine jobs that are going to succumb to automation, it may be difficult for them to get out. Because remember, the cost of this transition fall unevenly, and if you're in such a routine job and you lose it, it may be, what if you're 45 years old? You're going to upskill and go get another higher skilled jobs in the care profession? Not too likely, actually, not too likely. So those are the kinds of transition problems. Okay, so here's, that's a nasty looking robot, isn't it? It looks like it's going to come out and grab you. So this is my discussion of, okay, what can policies and institutions do in an age of skill-biased, labor-saving automation to promote, foster, generate, create, sustain good jobs? That's my question. And first of all, what are good jobs? Okay, I put a list here. We can talk about all of what good jobs are. Earnings, first of all, we think about good jobs. The first thing we think about is wage, but it's not the only thing. It's definitely not the only thing. There are legal protections, safety. There are anti-discrimination protections. There are protections against market power of your employer. Suppose your employer has a lot of power over setting the terms of your contract in a way which is not very competitive, but they have a lot of market power. That's something you need to be protected. There are social protections. This is goes back to Bismarck. You got it right. We got to worry about how we protect people from social risk, health, old age, job loss. And then finally, a good job, certainly in this society, is a job which actually allows workers to have some voice, somehow, either through a works council or a union or a tripartite conversation with government or a a policy lab at BMAS, which kind of looks at new things to do. There's got to be a way for workers to feel they have some stake in the outcome and some ability to raise a voice. This is very important in the US because it's completely absent. So a lot of American economists talk about the need to do this, and when they talk about it, they look at places like Germany and say, oh, okay, they've got some interesting institutions, maybe we should think about those. I just wanted to bring this up because this is a term you're likely to hear more and more. Those economists and public policy makers who think about income inequality, a lot of the solutions being proposed are redistribution. So just tax the wealth, tax the top 1%, tax, and redistribute the income. Just do massive redistribution. Another way to think about it is before the income is distributed, you worry about pre-distribution. This is where you're thinking about good jobs. Before the income goes to capital and to labor, let's think about, are there ways to get a fairer distribution going in so by the time the tax authorities come into this, the distribution actually looks a little more even. So people are beginning to talk about it in these terms, certainly in the US. It might pick up here, but in the US it's become a big, because a lot of the proposals in the US are very massively redistributive. And there is another set of voices saying, no, let's worry about pre-distribution. So I just want to bring that up. Okay, here are some policies and institutions, areas one can think about. I may have missed some. I'm interested in the policymakers here telling me. But I came up with some. So I just want to start with aggregate demand. So part of the problem with looking at the effects of technology on the labor market in Germany over the past 20 years is you've had a couple of major events. You had unification, okay? And you had, and we shared it with you in other parts of the world, a massive, massive economic recession and financial crisis around you. Germany managed to weather that pretty well, but all of the pressures coming from that were coming. So a key thing is you need adequate aggregate demand. This is monetary and fiscal policy. We could debate. I'm happy to debate with you what the European Central Bank should be doing, or whether Germany should be spending more on infrastructure. I personally think it should. But if you don't have that, then when a worker loses a job because of a technological change, there are not many alternatives because there's just weak demand. There's not enough infrastructure investment. There's not enough investment in alternative energy. There's not enough investment in the care sector. Therefore, there won't be the job. So aggregate demand is really important. Tax on capital versus tax on labor. So Germany and the rest of the OECD countries, but Germany in particular, if you think about taxes, it's taxing the use of labor at a very high rate. The tax on capital is really low. It's really low. So you're sitting there, you're a manager of business. Oh, I can choose between a piece of capital equipment that is a machine or a worker. I'm going to choose a machine. The capital is much cheaper to me, given the tax system, than labor. So we got to do something about that, it seems to me. Education and skills I'll talk a little bit about. Labor market tools, I want to talk a little bit about your minimum wage, which I think is really important. Protections for workers in non-standard employment. You know, you have a good system in Germany for a lot of social protections for workers in standard employment, but you've got a growing number of workers who are not in standard employment. They are not full-time workers in large companies. They are short-time workers on contract. They are outsourced workers. They are marginal workers in precarious jobs. And frankly, you don't have a lot of social protections for them. So nobody does, but that's important. Because if you think about it, what if technology means more and more workers do those kinds of jobs? So gig economy workers right now is a very small fraction of the workforce. But there are lots of projections which says it will become a much more important part. So what do we do about that? What do we do? Institutions for labor voice and then dialogues among social partners. Again, missing dialogue in the United States, but here you have such dialogues. In fact, I know that the ministries organize these dialogues. So let me just quickly go through. I've actually totally lost track of time. So
you have just another 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, so I just have to rush through all this. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so good, I can mention them. So looking right...
I wouldn't like anybody to ask a question. You have 10 minutes.
I want people to ask a question. I always learn from questions. In fact, somebody will ask a question and they'll tell me something that I don't know, and it'll be very helpful. So okay, so the institutions I've been looking at right now are apprenticeships, the minimum wage, collective bargaining, and works councils. So let me just quickly go through these. Apprenticeships, the U.S. right now, economists in the U.S. are really interested in the German apprenticeship system. Policymakers are. So the state of California is very interested. The state of Colorado is very interested. Some of the really big states thinking about employment, they're looking at this model and saying, the really good thing about this model is you got a shared, it's mixed financing, companies are involved, the government is involved, the companies and the business association are involved in determining what the education should be. It is actually, apprenticeships have actually been shown to really generate wage premia. That is, if you earn more, 46% more than similar young adults whose highest qualification is just upper secondary school, it pays to get an apprenticeship, even though the apprenticeship payment may not be high enough. It's still high relative to the alternative. So this is a very powerful system, and if you think about skills and education, it's a very powerful way to deliver. And there is a lot of work going on to actually add new programs that are designed for the particular set of skills that you need to work in the digital world. So we have new apprenticeship programs, and we have the reconfiguration of existing apprenticeship programs to try to provide for people the right skills. So remember, the technology is going to complement or enable people with the right skills in those high jobs, high income jobs. So if you can get the right skills, learn this way, this should be very helpful. And then finally, as I said, Germany is facing a really tight labor market right now, and these skills are in relatively short supply. So companies are interested in funding these apprenticeship programs as a way to locate talent and bring them in. So it's very powerful. It's a very powerful system. Minimum wage, I only want to note this because I want to say that this is another significant change in the German labor market, which makes it very complicated to sort of think about what's happening here, because Germany decided in 2015 to have a legally required minimum wage. And it was a total break with tradition, because tradition was the government stayed out of wage determination. It was voluntaristic between companies, employers, and workers. The government did not play a role. But the problem was that as this part-time marginalized workforce grew to become more and more significant, so when you're talking about 20% of the workforce or 25% of the workforce, these jobs were very poorly paid, and so there was a decision, and they were not at all represented by unions. There were no unions for such workers. There was no voice for such workers. So this was a process to say, okay, we'll introduce a minimum wage. And it has had an effect. It's actually increased the wages, not just for those workers, but actually the estimates are for the bottom 20% or 30% of wages have been moved up because of this. So it's not just the workers covered, but the whole wage structure. And it continues to increase. And there's an interesting method here of setting a commission. And the commission actually looks each year at what is the negotiated wages in the economy, negotiated by unions, negotiated between, and they take that and they make a decision about, okay, so if that's going up by 3%, maybe the minimum wage should go up by 3% too. Okay, I think this is really important because I think a number of these workers may be workers in transition, or they could be workers in transition to some of the jobs of the future, but they need a way to survive right now. So I actually think the minimum wage is very important. Here's my union picture. I am going to, because I want to go quickly here, we know that trade union membership has been declining in Germany. By all estimates, the whole power of the organized trade union movement has declined. Okay, it absolutely has declined. Part of that due to unification, by the way. Part of it definitely due to unification. Part of it due to here's a way in which unification had an effect you wouldn't necessarily expect, but there's a really powerful paper that has been very influential that has argued that the firms in the West, where there were powerful unions, said to their workers, we better negotiate a better wage deal or we're going to move. So it's the threat of moving, the threat of moving. And you actually do see much more moderate wage increases after unification, and you see a growing gap between wage increases and productivity increases. And that could be very much, okay, we got some alternatives here. You guys, if you want to keep your job and you want to be a competitive firm, a competitive member of a competitive BMW firm, you better allow us to exercise some wage restraint. Interesting. This just shows you, by the way, that unions matter in the following sense. The top line is real GDP growth per hour worked. Okay, so in an economically competitive world, the major driver of compensation should be productivity growth. Okay, but you see there's a gap. Productivity growth is faster than wage growth. And we can talk, and I think technology has a lot to do with that, but there it is. The middle one says, well, if you get your wage growth agreed by the unions, you're actually going to do a little better. Do a little better. The unions are able to capture some of the returns to technology for the union members. And that's, I think, really important. Works councils, this is a nice place for me to end in the following sense. One of the things I'm really trying to understand during my stay here is the role of works councils. And it's really hard.
We're trying to understand that too.
Okay. Well, thank goodness if someone inside is having the same problem. It is really, really hard, okay? Because, I don't know, because it's hard to talk to people on works councils, because it tends to be case studies, so you kind of understand how it might work in one firm, which is a different skill set than another firm. There's a lot of overlap between the works councils and the trade unions, so is it really a trade union effect or a works council effect? In principle, works councils should play an important role. And I've put together a research team with John Zeisman and others that are coming together for a workshop here. So one of the things we know from people who study technological change at the level of the enterprise itself, they have documented by case study after case study that the efficiency, the productivity gains, the benefits of adopting a piece of technology depend upon the reorganization of the workplace and the reorganization of the labor force. So you actually do have to have some buy-in from the people who are going to use the machines. You actually have to have their input in thinking about how to deploy it. So works councils have that role. They actually that's one of their legitimate roles. So maybe it's playing that role, but it's something I have to find out. I want non-standard work contracts. I'm going to end with a story about California here, because while I've been here, my state, and this is being discussed in Europe and it's being discussed here, I know, trying to figure out how to give benefits to people who are what we call gig economy workers. So a worker who's working for many platforms part-time, maybe 4 hours a week. Maybe they're working 60 hours a week, but for 4 different employers. Okay, they're working for Lyft, they got free taxi, they're working for Uber, okay. Are they anybody's employees? Or are they just self-employed? It's a big, this is a really important question, because if they're somebody's employees, somebody has to make contributions to their social benefits. So do they, by the way. It's not, okay. If they're somebody has to, and then they are going to get the tax forms, which will basically make sure that they pay their taxes. If you're self-employed, I don't know, you can avoid the tax system frequently. You got no benefits, you got no access to benefits. So what California decided to do, it's going to be very controversial, is say, you know what? If you're working for a platform, you are an employee. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Lyft. I'm sorry, Uber. I'm sorry, DoorDash. I'm sorry, Amazon Delivery. Those guys are your employees. Okay? And you therefore have to pay them as an employee, and you have to give them all the social protections. And if they're only working for you a few hours a week, fine, just prorate what you give them. Okay, 4 hours a week, here's my contributions for this worker for those 4 hours. Okay, so it's prorated benefits that move with the worker across the employers. Okay, and that's what California has decided to do. Now, let me end by saying a world of trade-offs. California does that. The estimates are that the cost of an Uber driver goes up by 20 to 30%. That's just the way it is because they get all these protections, employment rights, they get time off, they get, everything. All right, so that's true. So how's that going to be paid for? Who pays for it? The reality is that there are three possible payers. There's the consumers who pay higher price. There's the owners who get smaller profits. Or there's the workers themselves, because frequently what happens if you impose a lot of benefits on top of a wage, then over time the take-home amount goes down to make room for the benefits. So basically there is a trade-off, there is a cost, and who pays will probably be consumers, workers, and the owners in some distribution, which is going to depend upon things that only economists care about, like the elasticity of demand for the service. Okay, how much can they increase the price before people stop buying the service, okay? Or how concentrated is the ownership, the profit. If it's venture capitalists, and it frequently is, then are they going to take the hit? And how is that hit going to be distributed? So my bottom line here is that we have a bunch of new intelligent machines. We need a bunch of new intelligent policies. Intelligent policies can only be designed by humans. It's humans that are going to design the intelligent policy. Of course, humans can design really stupid policies too, but we have to hope that we will help them not make that mistake. So let me stop there. So, I do have time for questions.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And since you have handled many press conferences,
I'm speaking only for myself. I represent no government here. So I'm happy to say whatever. Yes, right over there.
So you talked about the difficulty of taxing capital versus...
Right.
You mentioned briefly the difficulty of taxing capital versus taxing labor.
Right.
And one of the classic problems with that is that it's a lot harder to measure and tax capital. And this is, of course, something that's going on in your country with discussions about wealth tax and things like that.
Right.
What do you think about, what can you say about the policy trade-offs and the economic trade-offs there?
In terms of how you measure the returns to capital? Is that what
How
mean?
you measure and how you enforce. I mean, in a world where especially technologically focused companies very often license and offshore their...
So I think so I would say two things. Number one, what stands out when you look at the German numbers is the extremely low share of tax on corporations. It's very low. It's a really small share. Okay, so you got a very large share on labor through all of these kind of taxes that go with carrying social benefits, and a very small amount on capital. So that you can measure some of that. The mobile capital argument, I think, is very important. And I think that Germany, with the U.S. and the European Union, should actually do much more, and it's slow, to basically deal with the profit shifting and base erosion that these companies do. Because the companies absolutely try as much as possible to move their taxable income to low tax locations. And I frankly think that we need to stop that. I think that the countries can't generate enough of the revenue they need for their own investment at home. So I would say that does require more coordination among the advanced industrial countries. Yeah, and you don't think so?
Any path towards?
So there's been some progress here. So I would say two things. Number one, on the OECD base erosion process, we already know much more now about where companies hold their profits because they have to actually report them. So we already have much more information about the locality of the profits. I think that the other thing you would say, and I guess I would applaud the EU here, is that basically it is the EU that is going after this income. That is basically saying, Google, you're not your stateless income, I'm sorry, we're going to make you pay taxes because a lot of what you produce. So one form of taxation of capital could just be, where is it that you are selling your product? Where is it you're selling your product? So you're selling a lot of your product throughout Europe, but you're putting all your net income in some faraway location where none of your production is. I think there's a legitimate argument for actually saying, no, we move to the tax system. Yeah. And I think the Europeans are kind of leading in this area, honestly.
Over the strenuous objections of the Irish.
And of the U.S. But that's all right, you know. There's going to be opposition. There are trade-offs. There are losers here. But I do think that is necessary. Yes. Oh, I didn't. Roberto, hi.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Thanks so much for that. Learned a lot from all of that. I'm wondering whether you see public policy levers that can be applied to directing where automation happens.
Wow. Go ahead. Give me what you're thinking about.
Well, I don't know. No, I really don't. I don't know. Is it possible? I mean, is it possible? Is there any wisdom to it? Is that a realm that government should be thinking about? What sectors of the economy?
Okay.
And are there levers that can be used to either speed up or slow down automation in different parts of the economy where the impacts might be greater or smaller?
So I know that there is, and I've just started to look into this. So Germany has a very interesting multi-year Industry 4.0 strategy. It's an increase in R&D spending, emphasis on innovation, emphasis on trying to create the foster innovation around technology. But they actually do also have within that, they have workers' organizations involved, and they do have as one of their criteria the employment effects. Okay, they actually do have it there. Now, whether it actually is having any role at all, I don't know. There would be nothing like that in the United States. There's no consideration. I mean, John Zeisman and I have been at meetings where the technology people will basically say their view is how many jobs can they get rid of. I mean, because essentially, think about it this way. A lot of the technologists in the United States, they're from these big tech firms. They're funded by venture capitalists. Their whole thing is the return to capital. The best way to return to capital is to cut your labor costs. Okay, it's absolutely the best thing to do. So basically, that's how they think of it. Just get rid of this stuff. If you start with a different consideration, I actually think you might be able to, at least at the margin, think about the employment effects. If you think about it this way. If you think about a challenge like if the future is going to be so much about health, the technology, there's a lot of ways in which the technology can enable people. It may not displace people as much as enable better service. Okay, so if you actually have, my goal in research is to support healthcare innovation, but that by itself will actually promote jobs. That's different than saying my goal is to support innovation around 5G, say, which may or may not have an employment effect. So I think it's something to think about. I actually do. There are some economists, in fact, a very influential economist in this world that I'm talking about, named Darren Acemoglu, and he and I were put on a panel of economists in Washington just a few weeks ago. And the charge to the panel was, can you think of anything that could be done to guide research and development in a direction where jobs were considered more? And both of us, we didn't, except for saying that we know that R&D, when R&D has had the goal of defense, or it's had the goal of, quantum computing, or it has the goal of climate change, it actually has an effect. The research and development goes in that direction. So, could we put together an R&D category which had to do with jobs for workers? Yes, and I think that's a really interesting idea. I really do. So. Good question, and I think people are starting to say, how would you even put that together, but it's worthy of a question. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. Nancy Vogt. Question about the internships.
Okay,
What you've
sure.
seen here in Germany.
Yeah.
I'm going to think 20 to 25 years ago, people were coming over from the U.S., from Japan. Let's see how Germany does their internship programs.
Right.
Lovely.
Right.
You're doing it again. You know, so question
Right.
is,
This is true.
what has been done here that you may have seen already that's been improved? And what do you think, has the U.S. adopted anything yet?
So
Or what have you seen here that might be excellent for them to adopt, and something that might actually be different from 20 years ago?
So I would say that I am in the process of making sure I could answer that question. What I have been struck by, and I've heard this from people, is the creation of new programs. So what happens here is that the businesses and the training institutions understand that the nature of the work around this technology is changing, and therefore the training, the intern is hired to do something different, and the training in the public institution is different. So I do think they are trying to add whole new apprenticeships. I mean, one of the scholars I've met here, she was saying there are like 3 new apprenticeship programs for different kinds of accounting in digital spaces. Okay, so they're literally saying we're going to redesign new curriculum. So I think that you can have that, and you can have probably more effective use of the delivery mechanisms themselves being delivered digitally. So I do think there's innovation going on. As far as the United States is concerned, the Trump administration put in the staggering total of $100 million to promote internships in the United States. But really what's going on here is the interesting work at the states. So we have something like about 30 states, probably more at this point, that have formed an alliance. It was sparked by a nonprofit. Nonprofits in the United States oftentimes, in the absence of government action, so it's called the Rework Initiative. And the governors have come together to look at various policies to try to foster good jobs. And apprenticeships is one of the things that some of the states, so Colorado's doing it already. Colorado was the lead state here. And they actually copied the Swiss model more than the German model. But they actually work with their public school system and their community college system and employers associations to try to create some. And they do have some now. They have some apprenticeship programs. So, and I think California will do that. But what's interesting is that the states have really, and it's red and blue states, have said maybe this is the right answer. Now, some states have handled it. So there's a lot of states. Tennessee was a leader here. In the U.S., in the absence of apprenticeships, the closest thing is community colleges. And so the community colleges oftentimes have courses or certificate programs that are designed in part with the business community. So you have that element. The businesses are not hiring the students as apprentices. They might hire them for a summer as an intern, that sort of thing. But it's still the case that the business is helping to design the curriculum. And a number of states now have made community colleges free. Now, free, at least in the sense that what the state does is it gives scholarships. If you go to a community college, you're not going to have to pay the fee. It's not free. The states know it's not free, but the state is going to absorb the cost. So there's some stuff going on in the U.S. Yeah. So, yes. I was going to go back, because then I'll come forward, and then I think we're done.
Thank you. I was interested in the article printed in the publication, and in the middle it was the information, I think, that you kind of presented at the end,
Right.
was that Germany performed very well in terms of adapting technology and keeping the workplaces, keeping the jobs there. Mm-hmm. And my question initially coming in was what would have been the role of the Betriebsrat in this, the work councils.
So it's very hard to tell. See, he's talking about a study. It's a very interesting study where a group of economists in the U.S. they took localities where there was a large increase in robots per worker. And they tried to assess how many jobs were displaced because of that, and whether those jobs that were displaced, those workers were absorbed into other jobs. So whether layoffs or just, or not. So what they found out is in Germany, the displacement effect was bigger. There were more jobs that were disappeared because of the robots, but on the other hand, those workers didn't disappear. They actually were kind of moved into service or support roles within the organization, or with firms that were selling things to the organization. So it was maybe not within the firm itself, but they were absorbed into the workforce that served that company. It's just very hard there's no evidence from that study whether the works councils had any role or not.
I've been reading recently about the background of the Betriebsrat, about the work councils, and their roots,
yes,
not in the guilds, but in the November Revolution of 1918. It's a really fascinating reading. I can share it with you afterwards if you want. But I think that this is where, to me, it seems like the answer lies, is worker involvement in the, not just for buy-in, but as a valuable contribution to the future of how this technology will work.
And as I said, the evidence of cases, and even that study, the evidence of cases is that the more you can get the engagement of the workforce as you're deploying the technology, the greater the productivity benefits of it. Because it otherwise it's just disruptive, and the workers have a lot of understanding about how best to deploy the technology also. So they have a lot of competence that's built into their experience in the firm. So if you're going to put some new technology in, having their discussion does matter. So I think that's really why I want to try to find out more about works councils. I did mention that that's been the hardest part of this, but that is my hope, my goal. So.
2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more questions? Or any? Yes, yes.
So it's, I think, a little bit of a follow-on question to the gentleman sitting in front of me. Do you see that there's we talked a bit about wage gap. We talked a bit about the middle income being the targeted spot. But frankly, there's a lot of automation possibility in things like really high-end jobs. So a company in Japan has put a bot on their board. Frankly, if you look at the legal system, judges are the most likely to be automated. But there is no social... Like, the economic factors working against automating judges' jobs are incredibly high, right? Like, there's no...
It's a profession.
Nobody's going to fund that,
They have
right?
professions. They have professions.
They know people. They're going to squash all of that technology. Is there a place for policy, they run things, that helps or could help, or do you see it as having a role in saying, listen, if we're going to automate middle, everybody sort of has to pitch in, and we're going to automate the things that can be automated for a better society, and therefore... high income is equally fair. Like, those people that have the money to defend their jobs are equal game for those people that don't.
But you're asking a different question. You don't want everybody to be equal game. You want to say, how can the middle be more protective?
Well, or how can policy help focus it in the right spots, right? Like, in theory, if we automate judge decisions, we can get away from a lot of the social biases, like in the U.S. of the disparity between black people versus white people in prison.
We don't know. It's very controversial because actually there are a lot of people who feel that the algorithms themselves are very biased. Right. It's very controversial.
Right. You have to catch up with the laws, the clarity of that.
Yeah.
Like, there's work to be done. But
I guess I think what the right way. So there are many answers that come to mind here. One is the problem is in the middle skill jobs that are at risk here, they tend to be, they're a significant part of the labor costs of doing production. And the firms are run by stakeholders whose main concern is to reduce costs and increase returns to profits. That's what their legitimate purpose is, okay? So if it's an easy thing, the easiest thing for you to do is to use the technology to cut the labor costs because your stakeholder is interested in the residual returns, you're going to do that. That's not true of judges, okay? In judges, society is basically saying, this is the role of a judge, and we as a society will say whether we think it's a good idea or a bad idea to have the technology sort of enable or displace or distort. There isn't the same incentive to use the technology to reduce labor costs. So this is a fundamental issue here, right? And I think that, so it is the case now. We'll see if it means anything at all. So I think it means something for skilled labor. So here's what's happened. So the Business Roundtable in the United States has said all of a sudden we're not just for shareholders, we're for stakeholders. And they say right in their second line, that means talent. Okay. Most of what they're talking about is the shortage of skilled labor talent. Okay, they all want to keep their skilled workforce. They all want committed, engaged young workers with technical talents. They're not that concerned about the kind of mid-skill, mid-age worker who was, doing traditional old jobs in the firm. No, they're not. What they might do, is allow that workforce to decline with attrition. So I think one thing I didn't mention here, but I think is really important, is this may be changing the job possibilities for the new entrants. So the incumbents might be, particularly in the German situation, might be pretty well protected. If you're in a big firm and there's, got a pretty powerful union, collective bargaining, works council, you'll be able to protect the workers who are inside. So this is an insider game. But the number of jobs that will be available for new workers as those leave will be lower. And that actually was one of the conclusions of the study I mentioned on robots. So basically they're worried about the new workers. I'm on the board of a very large technology company in the United States. It has a 10-year plan to retrain its workers, but also to completely reduce the size of the workforce. So it says, okay, that's going to happen. We're going to let all of that happen through attrition. We're not going to lay people off, just attrition. And the people who stay or the people who get to come in, much smaller number, and they have to have much different skills. So, yeah. Okay, so yes, you had your hand up for a while, so.
Thank you. Trevor Evans, Berlin School of Economics. And the focus of your talk has mainly been on labour market issues.
Yes, mainly on that.
But one of the most striking things about developments both in North America and Western Europe has been the low level of investment in the most recent expansion.
In the most recent
It's been lower
expansion.
in this expansion than the previous expansion, which in turn was lower than... So basically investments on a downward course. Do we need public policies that are going to play a much more active role? These firms are making gigantic profits, but they are not using them to invest in good jobs, bad jobs, or any jobs.
Or any jobs. I don't know, yes, the answer is yes. I don't think we actually have a really good handle about why that is true. I don't think we... I tried to handle that indirectly by saying that when you say that there are going to be enough jobs in the future, you actually are assuming that there's going to be adequate investment in these key areas of the economy which are going to be net job creators, even with automation. They are going to be net, but they won't be net job creators if there's not enough investment. So I do think that, but what's interesting about that list of things to invest in, a lot of those things are public investment. So they are, infrastructure. Housing, are we going to leave the housing problem just to the private property market? Is that what we're going to do? Alternative energy, climate change. Those are things where you could say society needs a lot of investment, particularly in these areas, or health or healthcare, and they will employ a lot of people going forward. But if we don't have the adequate investment, that will not happen. And then you say, oh my God, a lot of these sectors are sectors where public funding is really important. So if I'm talking about that in the U.S., I will oftentimes say that the real problem for governments is we don't have the allowance of a capital budget. So we basically just we basically have these government budgets which are very cyclically erratic. They kind of move all over the map. And we're messing up the sort of the social obligations with long-term investment, and we really should separate those two. And then we could get perhaps more public investment, which would encourage. I'm one who actually believes that public investment does not crowd out private investment. It encourages private investment. So I would rather see more public investment, and that will encourage more private investment. That would be my answer.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.